we have one more incredible story. Our next speaker is Ross Mason. He created the Healthcare Institute for National Renewal and Innovation. And he has a very long career, but I would like Ross to come over to the front. Ross needs a microphone. He's a venture capitalist, he's a philanthropist, he has done so many things to improve so many other lives.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Great. It's a pleasure to be with you this afternoon. What an incredibly moving story about forgiveness. It's an honor to be here. Just over 10 years ago, I had had a real estate business in Russia for a dozen years and a career as a private banker on Wall Street and in Europe and Russia. But I left my career and ended up traveling around Africa and volunteered in a hospital in Zambia where 82% of the patients had AIDS. And it was really, it was in the summer of '99, really a moving and life-changing experience for me. And I was just overwhelmed with the compassion, love, the community, and the sense of joy that people with such limited resources were coming together to try to address such a life threat to Silicon Valley. And after selling a company, worked on a project in Germany where there was 17.2% unemployment, where Volkswagen was headquartered, with a per-year period, and led some of the leading technology firms in the world: Google, PayPal, Ask Jeeves, OpenTable, Red Envelope, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Groupon, many of the names you've heard about. And we were part of a €500 million investment in Germany to try to help address unemployment, which went from 17.2% to 6.4% over a decade, with 341 startups that were done in healthcare, IT, mobility, and entertainment. And I created Henry in California at that time to try to combine those two experiences. How could I bring together the compassion, love, and community that I'd experienced with such limited resources in that African AIDS hospital with the drive, innovation in the world? Half of the follow-on investment that my mentor received in those 422 angel deals was from Sequoia. And their one investment criteria was, it must be big. If you're solving a big enough problem with the leading innovators, if personal computers are the future, or the internet's the future, or mobile application, then we're going to make money as a venture capitalist. And so I took that approach and said, I want to solve really big problems with leading innovators. And innovators are critical. Think about what Bangladesh would look like without Muhammad Yunus. What if he'd grown up in India? Think about what Silicon Valley would look like without the Fairchild 8 or a Steve Jobs. Or we're in Atlanta, Georgia. If I told you I was going to move 4 people away when they were 20 years old, and I took away Robert Woodruff, the founder of Coca-Cola, Bernie Marcus, the founder of Civil Rights Movement, and I moved just those 4 individuals somewhere else when they were 20 years old, Atlanta and Georgia would be a very different place. So I decided I wanted to solve really big problems with leaders. Georgia, I was appointed to our state health board, and that was where I wanted to start, was the Georgia ecosystem, although we do projects that are state, national, and global in scale. But when I started just in Georgia at that time, 10 years ago, the United States that year spent $2.7 trillion on healthcare. Yet the World Health Organization ranked us 37th in healthcare quality. We were 28th in life expectancy. In the state of Georgia, we have 159 counties in Georgia, for you, those of you who aren't familiar. 57 didn't have a doctor, 67 didn't have a primary care physician, 88 had third world healthcare demographics. We led the nation in the percentage of our population with TB and AIDS. We were #1 in cancer mortality, 2nd in childhood obesity, and in the bottom 5 in every chronic disease in the United States. And it reminded me of my time in Russia. And there's a wonderfully famous Russian proverb where the Russian people are on a train, and the train stops and they get the train going, and it stops again, and Khrushchev's in charge, and he says, free everybody from the gulag and we'll get the train going again, and they do. And the train stops a third time, and Brezhnev's in charge, and he says, pull down the shades and pretend we're moving. And one of the biggest challenges you have when you've got those sort of demographics and problems in healthcare, whether it's Africa or the United States or other parts of the world, is you've got to be honest in assessing the problem, partnering with innovators to help solve those problems. As Yogi Berra said, in theory and practice are the same. In practice, they're not. So you're going to have to have the willingness to change and be partnered with, and either partnering with innovators, recruiting innovators, starting organizations, or creating coalitions to address those problems. So our first problem that we took on that provided free care last year to 325,000 Georgians in 130 counties and saved the state $420 million. Our goal is to provide care to 1 million people a year, save $1 billion a year in every Georgia county, and I think we'll be there in the next 18 to 24 months. Our second challenge we tried to take on was autism, which 1 out of 88 children is born on the autistic spectrum. So we raised several $1 million with an innovative partner in Georgia, and now we're working in over 40 states, more than 200 school districts, working with Harvard Medical School and the Swiss government to set up an international center in Switzerland and other countries around the world. Our third issue was military reintegrations and suicides, and so we have done retreats for suicide prevention with the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Chairman's Reintegration Team, training centers with a number of partners around the country, because the federal government has mandated that you must hire 7% of your workforce must be disabled. If you get a certain percentage in federal revenue, reimbursement on programs. So with Warm Springs and other partners, we're setting up manufacturing ecosystems to employ veterans, human rights. We are working with the British royal family and Parliament, the South Korean Supreme Court and Diplomatic Corps on human rights abuses, and we've launched that program in the Georgia school system this fall in every 10th grade through an effort called kingrights.org that Andrew Young is chairing. Clean water, vaccines, and antivirals. We have a program that's trying to feed 2 million children a year. But the way you do that is you partner with people who have a passion for innovation, and we connect the resource with the need while trying to minister to giver and recipient. So we're bringing a venture capital public market approach to solving problems. So if I had to describe, and probably are doing on a bigger scale than we are, it's the story of Etta Mae Budd. Has anybody ever heard of Etta Mae Budd in the audience? Is she familiar to anyone? Well, Etta Mae Budd, and we were a very segregated society at that point in this culture, of course. And there was an African-American young man who was eating in the kitchen, and she said, "Why don't you come out here and eat with me?" Which he did, and he had this book he was drawing. And she said, "Do you want to be an artist?" He said, "No, he was drawing plants." He said, "I'm interested in studying agriculture." And she said, "But I just don't think I'm going to have the opportunity because of my background and race to get the education that I want." And she said, "Well, my father is the president of this university. Let me speak to him and see what I can do." This young man's name was George. So as a result of that conversation, George got his education. That young man was George Washington Carver. He then mentored a 6-year-old named Henry, whose father was the dean of students. And that young man, because of the love he developed for agriculture and working with George Washington Carver, Henry Wallace became Secretary of Agriculture and the Vice President of the United States. Norman Borlaug and the Rockefeller Foundation to work on crop-resistant, weather-resistant, and rust-resistant crops. It ended up out of Mexico and ended up saving the lives of almost 1 billion people, winning the 1970 Nobel Peace Prize, the Congressional Gold Medal, and the Presidential Medal of Honor. One of only 6 people in history to do that. So not everybody in this room is George Washington Carver or Norman Borlaug or Henry Wallace, but every one of us can be Etta Mae Budd. If Etta Mae Budd had not taken time to show kindness across racial lines, across the lines of gender, to someone she did not know, and help that person realize their potential. George Washington Carver never would have done his cutting, would have saved the lives of 1 billion people. I graduated from the North Avenue Trade School just down the road here, Georgia Tech. And when I was here in 5 years, when I was giving that same speech, and this is really what began my healthcare journey, when I was giving that same speech, somebody showed up in my office from high school from another city and said, "Let's go." And I said, "What on earth are we doing?" He said, "We're going to Pan for Gold. I just finished my medical exams. We're going to Pan for Gold." So sure enough, we got in his station wagon. He had picks, shovels, whatever. And we ended up picking up a hitchhiker. And it was a woman who'd been fired recently from a Waffle House or something. And we went on up and I was not excited to pick up a hitchhiker with him, because the last time he did that, it turned out to be two women who turned out to be men that forced him to take him at gunpoint. But in this case, it really was a woman. And we took her, bought her dinner, and dropped her off, and then went and panned for gold and came back. And we talked to 4 people that had been injured in a fire in the China Star Motel, and 1 person had died. And it was Lynn Jordan, the hitchhiker that we picked up 5 hours before. And I shared that story with the freshmen, and I said, "Different. Look to your left." It doesn't matter whether you have a 4.0, you're a student body president, captain of the football team, whatever it is. Look to your left, look to your right. What matters is the person to your left and to your right. They are an eternal child of the living God, and the impact that you have on their life is what's going to matter for all eternity. So that's what we try to do every day with Henry, is love the people to the left that God puts to our left and God puts to our right, and do our best to love and serve them with the gifts and resources that He's given us. God bless you.